the ringside seats. So they don't care about the media coverage. It's all about getting the money in. So it's all about selling it no matter what. And like I know Mark O'Toole is involved in MMA himself, so his take is interesting on it. And like my son is dyspraxia, and he can't do team sports, but he took up Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu,
right.
and it's been really good for him. Like the discipline and the techniques, and there's very good people involved in it. But I would make the distinction, as Mark does, between MMA and UFC.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt the UFC is all about money, 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 and very little else. Interestingly, so referring back to Brolly's overarching point, Mark in his piece in the Sunday Business Post Plus section talks about the attacks that often come in the Irish media and beyond. He says many of whom have never been to an MMA event, let alone a gym, and whose common jab at MMA is the phrase, "This is not a sport." He says they often paint MMA as something akin to pro wrestling or an unskilled, barbaric, no-holds-barred contest between fighters akin to a scrap between two thugs outside a chipper. And he says the reality is that this is a skilled sport requiring months of preparation for a fight between contestants with a high level of multiple martial arts who try to knit a strategy together in real time. And I'm always torn on that point because, you know, one of the great ripostes from MMA people when, you know, this conversation first started on Liveline kind of 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago was, well, you just don't understand what you're seeing.
Yeah.
And I've lost patience with that argument.
Yeah.
I think anyone is entitled to watch, particularly that Ferguson-Pettis fight and the blood, and say, I understand this. I do understand what I'm seeing. Now, Mark is absolutely right that the amount of skill and training that must go into being anyway decent at all these various disciplines. You know, it's not just like boxing. I mean, there's a million different things going on. McGregor's such an amazing striker and can kick, but then on the ground isn't as good. Like, the array of things you have to be good at is so vast. So you can appreciate all that, and you can still, I think, as lots of people do, look at it and just think, this is barbaric, it goes too far, there's too much blood, it's too dangerous, people die, why do we do this?
And it's important to, you know, the reason there is such scrutiny on it is it is a sport battling for legitimacy and acceptance. Like, it's only 2 years ago that the ban in New York was lifted. It had been banned for 20 years. It's still banned in France. Sport Ireland have never recognised it. And it's interesting that a lot of the opposition comes from other martial arts organisations. That's the case in Ireland. In France, the main opposition to MMA being recognised comes from the Judo Federation. That they think it's unsafe and unregulated, and possibly there's a bit of jealousy there as well because it's getting the numbers that they're not getting.
There is a legacy issue in all that, because when it first started, it was like the only rule is there's no rules. And it was all like, off we go. And Mark outlines very well, actually, I think, in his piece, how they have changed from when John McCain said it was human cockfighting through to where we are now. Like, Brolly in his piece says there are no rules. Like, there are rules. You can't headbutt. You can't even elbow someone at certain angles. You can't do a 90-degree straight down elbow to the head. You can't knee someone in the head if they're lying down. So there are rules. Obviously, it mightn't appear like that to lots of people watching, but there are rules. I mean, it's not going anywhere. There were 2.5 million pay-per-views. It broke all sorts of records. It's more popular
but that's
than
McGregor,
ever.
Though. Like, if you look at 5 of the 6 top pay-per-view events of all time are McGregor. Like, when McGregor goes, where's the sport? That's a big question.
This is covered. Is that in Mark's piece, or it's in one of the
Joe
pieces?
Callahan talks about it.
Where just what a gift he was, that he was an English-speaking guy who managed to get them out of their little, you can call it a sporting ghetto, and into the limelight.
Yeah, like Khabib is never going to be a crossover star.
Khabib's got the wrong style, and he just doesn't have the personality for it.
And he's the wrong nationality for what they want.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
That's the reality.
So, I mean, the question is is this a sport that has hit its high point for now? I mean, where is the next superstar coming from? Ronda Rousey's gone as well. Even the guys who preceded McGregor were not the type to thump their chests and break out of a very small marketplace. So it is a legitimate question.
Yeah, it is hard to watch. I mean, that Ferguson fight is grim. It was just, there was blood everywhere. At one point, they looked at each other and almost laughed at how ridiculous the other looked, realising they looked pretty similar.
That's what strikes me about Brolly's piece, that his 13-year-old was watching with his friends, and they wouldn't be unusual. I'm sure there's loads of kids that age watching it too.
And then I heard, God, sorry, his name escapes me terribly now. Meath footballer. I hate to use this example. He was the one who wasn't happy with Aidan O'Shea signing the autographs.
Oh, Bernard Flynn.
Heard Bernard Flynn. Sorry, Bernard. I know you're not to define you by that. Sorry, it was the first thing that popped into my head. But I heard him in a podcast.
One of the greatest players of the 90s.
I know, it's dreadful. That is dreadful.
That's all he ever did.
I apologise sincerely. That is deeply unfair. You were far more than that. But Bernard was on talking about it on a podcast on the Irish Mirror do with Shane Stapleton, and he was talking about that same Ferguson fight that you have Brolly sitting there genuinely horrified by. I was somewhere in the middle. I was getting to a point where I was like, this is kind of hard to watch. My partner, she was saying, turn this off. Yeah. Bernard was sort of saying he loved it. He thought it was like, you know, like a peak
of Meath training session with Mick Lads and Jerry McAtee,
like
Lee Byrne.
Of human endurance and human courage and skill and bravery and all of these attributes that he thought, you know, and he did sort of quit. Now, I don't know what that says about me.
Yeah. But that's unusual that Bernard thinks that, because there's a definite generation gap.
Totally,
generally people over 40 or over maybe even over 35 have no time for it. And people and I often wonder, is it a gap between people who grew up with even the video game culture, that's you're just growing up at a different time and had different means of entertainment as a kid, and even the wrestling, growing up at WWE and all that. And I'm not saying it's similar. It's like WWE is obviously fake, but it's just they have a different idea what sport is, I think, a younger generation.
You're right on a generational thing as well, and it's not just about what the fight is, it's everything that goes on around the fighting and what's acceptable. And obviously with McGregor and Khabib, there was a lot about, you know, religion brought into it, your father, this and that, everything else. And Joe Callahan in the Sunday Times, at the end of his piece, I think makes a very good point about a guy called Colby Covington, who I'd never heard about. A UFC interim middleweight champion and a Trump disciple who spends his days spouting right-wing slurs online. And this guy is clearly seeing what sells, and he clearly sees that hate sells, and this is going back into the McGregor thing. And I think it's all very difficult when you're writing a piece about drawing parallels with society and sport. You can sound very, very up your own backside, and it's a very, very hard thing to get a grip on. But I think Joe does it very well there, and he talks about, you know, how Covington is clued into this. The more outrageous I am, and where does the line? Where do you draw the line with that? It's the same inside the octagon that we were just talking about. Where is the line of acceptability?
Well, here's a question then as we bring it to a close. So as Brolly points out, there is a primitive instinct in us. Lots of people are very enthralled by violence and blood, and Tommy Martin during the week wrote a great piece. Like, what did we all do at school when we heard there was a fight? We found out where the hell it was on, and we got ourselves there. So say it's banned. Say it's made illegal. Like Brolly opens his piece by talking about Django Unchained.
Well, it goes underground then.
Well, I was going to say, and the distinct difference with slavery is that these fighters are getting paid, they have a choice, and there is a degree of regulation. I know he's saying there's no rules. There are rules. Mightn't like some of the rules for sure, but there are rules. So if you were to ban it, whilst acknowledging this primitive thirst for violence, and that some people like fighting, then where does it go? It disappears. Like, is cockfighting gone? Just because it's illegal in 50 states in America now? No, it's not.
But when you ban anything, it goes underground because it's more dangerous. Like, it was,
so what's the answer then?
With abortion, like Backstreet Abortion, killed.
Absolutely. I think making it illegal, I mean, the cat's out of the bag. That's like that ship has sailed. So what do you do? Do you try and even bring in more rules and regulate the violence?
I think you needed another body other than the UFC. I think you need a body whose primary motive or motivation is to look after the athletes and look after the sport, not their bank balance. And the UFC.
And do you feel queasy?
Not fit for purpose.
No, the UFC. I mean, the one thing that Mark O'Toole, Joe Callahan, Joe Brolly all agree on is that the UFC, frankly, is a bit of a disgrace, and Dana White is. I mean, well, there was a great quote from Mark in his piece which I hadn't seen. So yes, he talked about Dana White the evening when he was giving it the "I'm just disappointed" routine. He says, Mark, the disgust that Dana had felt subsidised a few hours later when he gleefully declared the event had made more money than ever and had comfortably broken its pay-per-view record. So this is a quote from Dana White the next morning. The pay-per-view numbers are starting to roll in, so I'm in a much better mood than I was. We're way over 2 million, so I'm happy. And that is the truth. But would you, I mean, if you kind of feel queasy about this, Kieran, then should you not feel just as queasy about boxing if you're saying it's even more dangerous?
I'm questioning boxing a lot at the moment. Let's be honest. No, not just because of the violence, but everything that's going around it at the moment. Like, you look at the guy who's been put in charge of the IABA, the international governing body, and who's been linked by the American authorities to the heroin trade. You know, they've come out in public and said this. Like, it's safe to say this, but You look at all that's going on.
You could see the flash of panic in my eyes.
Yeah, you could, well, there's going to be more now because you've got the MTK situation and the links or supposed links there. So I've become very disillusioned with boxing anyway.
But what about so the criminal elements around it are one thing, but what about two men in a ring with boxing gloves, the great art of boxing?
Yeah, well, so because we'll probably come to it in a while because of the Katie Taylor piece in the paper, but I saw the Katie documentary Ross Whittaker made and it's brilliant, but the slow motion footage of the action in the ring, it really hammers home to you like how brutal a sport boxing is. You know, when you see the impact of the blows, and it's hard to defend that, and it goes back to the Tommy Martin's piece. There is a bloodlust in us. It's how you regulate that, because people do want to watch it, and not even do people want to watch it, people want to do it. Like, so people like Katie Taylor want to get into a ring.
Don't we have to be mature about that thirst in us? Like you could say, I mean, you could make the same argument about legalising prostitution. You could say, like, this is not going away, so let's just regulate it.
Like, so this is something, I think Philly McMahon has got a documentary on this about why drugs should be legalised. Because the supposed war on drugs doesn't work.
Doesn't that extend to UFC and boxing?
Just the whole thing on that then, and it's the same argument with rugby, is consenting adults can do what they want. If there's proper rules and structures in place, well, then you accept there's an element of risk. The problem is when you talk about under 18s, and where does the responsibility lie with potentially putting them in harm's way, even with all these risks, because you're under 18, you're not in a position to make a properly informed choice for yourself. So, I mean, I take the point, you're talking about your son, Kieran, as well. We all know, sport, there's brilliant lessons to be learned. There's societal things that they're brilliant with. But at what point do you say, well, okay, well, am I setting my child or whatever down this road, and is that acceptable? Whether it's rugby or martial arts or boxing or MMA, I mean, you know, you're lighting a candle there and it burns down without you long after you've made that initial decision. So that's where the argument gets a little bit grey. Yeah. Consenting adults, fine, rules are there, you've drug tested, everything's okay. It's when you bring kids into it.
Yeah, because it's funny, because just on it, because my son showed me a move and he said, you know, I know how to snap someone's spine. And I was like, what? And he said, this move, and you think, you know, you're asking a kid to have a hell of a lot of control when you're showing them that moves, and, you know, it's...
And is it difficult to snap someone's spine?
He doesn't know yet.
Well, I hope he never...
Did you ask him to show you the move?
Well, he kind of...
I mean, let's not put it out there. Let's not put it out there on the radio. Don't do a demonstration.
Might have done it a teddy bear or something. Not on me. My back is patted.
Right. Yeah, but, funny, because I remember being in school and WWE, a few of my mates inexplicably seemed to get into it around 15, 16. And honestly, lunch breaks for about a year became a nightmare. A nightmare. And lads were getting in the headlocks and doing all sorts, and it's no crack.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. There we are. It's a conversation that's been going for about 10 years.
We're going on to GAA violence now.
Yeah, let's get on to the real violence. Let's talk about the real stuff. So, the Mail on Sunday in particular, I think, have gone very big on the GAA violence and done some really good pieces. Philip Lanigan's piece I thought was very good. Michael Duignan and Marcus Shea write about it. Shea McGrath's writing about it as well. Everybody, for a start, is in agreement that the GAA have been incredibly quiet this week and should have said something, even if, so Philip Lanigan touched on, Enda McGinley was on this show during the week, and Enda made very good points where he talked about we really are flirting with the danger of a one-punch fatality if this continues. He talked about how things like corporal punishment and drink driving were once acceptable, and even if these episodes are not on the rise and we're just seeing them more because of smartphones everywhere, even if that is the case, then even 1% of matches where this is happening, like fans getting involved, players, the whole team getting involved, then that is too much. And so Philip put these points, I think, to the GAA, and there was a sense that, well, we can't comment on open investigations or open disciplinary situations, but there was right across the board a sense of frustration that John Horn or somebody from the GAA has not come out after the last 2 months and said, we are going to get a grip on this.
It's not difficult. I mean, I'm speaking to rugby authorities as well about there's occasional things that go through disciplinary procedures, and all you have to do is preface what you're saying is, I'm not talking about any particular case, but in a general point, and then you talk about it. We obviously abhor this and anything with a number of people and off the ball and something that goes in off the pitch, people coming onto the pitch. It's a general point. And I think it's a fair point that Philip makes and other people make today, that it's not asking too much for the GAA leadership to come out and make that point. It's important that it does so. It's not, somebody made a point in the paper today, it's not going to solve anything, but it's a starting point. And this is clearly a cultural issue, and I still haven't been able to get my kids into the mini GAA camps or whatever. They're still not showing an interest, so I don't know what goes on the ground. But is this going to need, somebody makes the point, it might be Michael Dignan or somebody today, is this going to need an absolutely zeroed in focus at Go Games level, that this is something that is drilled into the kids, that you literally need to drill in that low? At under 6s, under 7s, under 8s. It can be done.
From a young age, it should be spelt out what is not acceptable and how potentially dangerous it is to throw a punch or a dig of a hurley, says Dignan. And he does make the point that it's mainly been football over the last few weeks, but he's fairly sure grim things happen at hurling as well. And a few people as well, Dignan mentions the John Milan example of him when he came into contact with Brian Murphy in 2004, how he actually took the ban.
Yeah.
You know, a few people make that point. So, you know, Shane McGrath says guilt is nothing more than an obstacle to be hurdled in the GAA.
Yeah.
And Charlotte Burns has a great quote in Philip Lanigan's piece where he says, I'm part of the GAA disciplinary process at the DRA level.
Yeah.
And he says, pick any of those incidents, say the Downpatrick Ballyholland one, for instance. He says, you're sitting on the Down CCC and you have that video and you say it's bad, terrible, no excuse. You look at it 10 times, you pick out a number, say you're going to investigate it. And then, you know, he says, maybe the numbers are too grainy because the pictures aren't good enough. Or he says, say you're going to find the clubs. They ask for a hearing, they're entitled to a hearing. He says the hearing finds against them. But then it turns out if the email has been sent in the wrong way or something like that, they win their hearing. Or then they lose their hearing, then they go on to the DRA and we find ourselves adjudicating on it. He says there are so many throws of a dice in the disciplinary system that somebody somewhere will say they got this little detail wrong or that detail wrong. And they never get off in oh, actually you didn't throw the punch. It's always a technicality.
Yeah. But that's exactly it, because that is the culture in the GAA, that people won't accept their punishment. You will appeal even when you know you're guilty. Like, I remember talking to Eamon McGee about this one time, and he said, you know, he got banged to rights. He said, I know I did this wrong. And he said, they appealed. He said, I didn't want them to, but, you know, you're just told you appeal no matter what. You don't accept the punishment. And that's, you know, I think you have to throw like, if you can't differentiate the numbers, say in that Down incident, then you throw the clubs out.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's the only way people would ever take seriously if a club was thrown out of a championship for a year, and it's a severe punishment, but it would hammer the message home. But the problem is, as Charlotte points out, there are so many loopholes there for appeal that they need a complete new rule book that doesn't allow any room for appeal in those kind of situations. Because you look at the Sean Cox situation, which is desperately sad, and you look at so many other incidents of one-punch attacks and the consequences on those. Somebody is going to either get killed or get seriously maimed for life. Because there's something else nobody talks about.
They're stronger than ever as well.
Because that's something else that I think could be relevant. I have no idea if it's relevant to any of the incidents that happened in recent weeks or in Las Vegas. But there was a survey last week, did you see this, on steroids? And 1 in 5 people between 15 and 34 in Ireland, not just athletes or people involved in sport, 1 in 5 of the entire population said they would take anabolic steroids. And the reason is body image and wanting to build themselves up. But a byproduct of steroid use is aggression, roid rage. And that is dangerous when you have a gym culture and people who might be on steroids. I have no idea if it happened any incident around here, but it is part of the culture now. Like, there was nearly 500,000 seizures of illegal anabolics in Ireland last year. And that's gone up that nearly doubled in the year before, trebled from the year before that. So that is an issue nobody ever talks about.
Yeah, you wonder if anger is a part of it. Like, Dignan even raises that point. He says, I watched a TV programme the other night featuring a teacher who was frustrated trying to buy a house and move out of his parents' home because of the crazy prices in the rental market. He says, there's a lot of rage out there about everyday issues. It is possible to argue that society is now easier, and yet that isn't the experience for a lot of people. So
I'd be more attuned to the parish argument as well. As good and all as it has been for the GAA, I think that's
the tribal element.
Clearly. I mean, we're all from different counties. We could all give, you know, umpteen examples of what we've seen and heard in the past, and we've seen it all over the country in the last couple of weeks. I definitely
found playing soccer, it was more about let's go out and try and play well.
Yeah.
You know, that was the attitude, let's go and play well, what are we going to do today? And the attitude in GAA was, these are the lads from 2 towns over. Let's get into these. Your family are out there.
Now, like, some of the most vicious things ever, like, was just maybe going back 80s really, some club games against our neighbouring club, and it was savage. Like, it was pure hatred. And I remember an interview with Keith Barr a few years ago, and Keith Barr said, in the GAA, the biggest bastard is always the fellow from the next parish.
Yeah, because Lanigan sort of
there
says
is that hatred there.
Philip Lanigan blaming the GAA is like blaming Donald Trump for climate change. It's not exactly the latter's fault.
Yeah.
He's talking about the current incumbents, but they're going to have to do something really soon. And there's also, like Enda McGinley said, the time has come now to centralise this. So county boards, you can't trust them, and because there's a hypocrisy there whereby Tyrone will mete out bans for a club situation, and literally in the same week appeal the Tyrone under-20s ban for that schmozzle a couple of weeks back. There's too much self-serving going on.
Well, this is an issue in whether it's disciplinary or anti-doping or whatever, and we've seen this separation of the organising body from the disciplinary body in all sorts of sports. And it's only when you think that it really does make perfect sense.
Yeah.
I mean, there has to be justice, and there has to be the perception of justice, and that should be separated. Now, you look at the amount of clubs at all levels in the GAA throughout the country, that is an enormous undertaking.
Yeah,
I mean, logistically, how do you even get your head around that?
I don't know.
It's a very difficult thing to do.
Here's a question then. Okay, so this is perfect fodder for newspapers and media discussions, and we sit here and all agree it's quite terrible and it will damage the GAA. At grassroots level, does anyone care? Or do people almost think, do you know what? Bit of argy-bargy, it's fine. Oh, there's a scrap, send it on to my WhatsApp,
I think there's
I'll have a look.
There's very much a mixed reaction. Like if you
But
go by
I don't think
social
it's
media,
damaging.
the amount of people that'll be given out about saying, oh, people shouldn't be filming this.
Yeah,
sure.
Just basically want the omerita and don't talk about it.
Do you think it's putting people off putting their kids involved in the GAA? Do you actually think it is? I have to say I don't. I think at grassroots.
No, I don't think they make that connection.
No,
I don't think people make that connection. No.
I don't know. I think in pubs around the country, if they're talking about it, did you see the bit?
Yeah, and
I think there's always an element of that. It's like we talked about the UFC. It's the playground instinct to.
And it's every year this time of year. Once the All Ireland ends, there's always these stories every single year. And what has changed? Nothing. Nothing has changed. It hasn't been confronted. So there's no will to confront it.
So like if you think things like drink driving, there's a social pressure now.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a social pressure in GAA clubs on the players who get involved in a melee.
Yeah, and also there's hypocrisy, because the amount of ex-players who would now have columns, saying this is awful, and then they'd be telling yarns about some butcher they used to play with to take the head off everybody you play with.
But again, that's it. It's
you can't sentimentalize
so I'm asking,
that,
do we want to clean it up then?
Yeah, you do. It's a
but do we really?
I think you do. Yeah,
I'm not talking about us here.
I think underneath all the joshing and everything, I mean, there has to be an understanding that you can kind of have a giggle over a pint at some video grab, but at the end of the day, like Enda McGinley says, all you need is one serious injury and then we all cop ourselves on. And that's why it comes back to, you're right, Kieran, you talk about the older generation and, well, in my day this was this and men were men and everything else, but that's why it comes down to how do you eradicate all this beyond disciplinary structures and everything? It starts with the children.
Yeah.
That's what you do. God, I nearly said think of the kids there, but do you know what I mean? That's what it is. Yeah. That's where you get it in.
I just wonder, because in one of the videos where there was a real proper one off the pitch, the people videoing it, chatting behind the camera were saying, here we go again. Jeez, aren't they gobshites? There was an element of, it's a bit of crack, it's not that big. No one was going, well, this is really shocking and dreadful, And yet in the media we put on that face. But I wonder. But
that's the horrible thing. I think it does need something for people wake up. Something horrific, because people won't wake up to the reality of what could happen until that does happen. Hopefully it never will now.
We might just conclude then. I mean, there's plenty of good pieces and different things. Ben Thornley's done an interview with the really Class of '92 guy, and he's got a book out. I think we're chasing him down. We'll try and get him on the show as well, talking about basically career-ruining injury. But Beckham and Scholes and Neville all said he was the one in the Class of '92 who would have outdone them all, which is a scary thought.
Shades of Adrian Doherty, the lad from Strabane. A horrific knee injury as well. There's a couple of them around them.
But Katie Taylor features a very good piece in the Mail, because I think we wonder at times with Katie, well, what's going on? What's she up to? There's a bit of a distance there. I think she's not based here anymore. You don't know when her next fight is. I must confess, I didn't actually realise her next fight is in Boston very soon. Yeah. Well, I think you will hear a lot about Katie in the next few weeks, because the documentary that directed by Ross Whittaker is getting a cinema release on October 26th, which is Friday week. There was a big cover interview with her in the Irish Times magazine yesterday, which is kind of kick-starting, and then she's fighting next week, topping the bill in Boston, which is a first for her.
And
That's because Billy Joe Saunders is banned. So
absolutely.
Philip almost makes the point, it'll be interesting to see now how popular she is when she has to carry this on her own.
But it's funny, her you'll see, if you see the documentary, there's a lot of her coach, Ross Enamite, in it, who's quite an interesting character, but...
He's the guy with the shaved head who pops up, isn't he?
He was tweeting yesterday about, there's a highlights clip of Katie's fight on his YouTube page, on his Facebook page, sorry. I said over 9 million views. He says people keep bringing this up that nobody's interested. He said there's far more interest out there than people think. But there's one stage in the film, excuse me, and I think it's Brian Peters, her manager, Ross Enamite, and Katie herself are in a room, and they're talking about their frustration of getting the top fights. Because there are 2 or 3 champions out there that she wants to fight, like Delphine Persoon in particular. And then there's... basically, they're saying there's a load of boxers at kind of the lower tier. Then there's the 3 or 4 really good champions at the top, but the middle tier is pretty empty, and that's a problem. And the main women are doing their best to avoid her until eventually they get a good enough offer that they can't turn down.
Yeah. And
then the others that she's going in against, they just aren't able to give her enough of a fight. Like next week, Cindy Serrano. Katie's 25 to 1 on to win that fight, and she's been at those kind of odds for, I think, virtually at least 90% of her pro fights, which isn't her fault. She can only fight the ones the fighters are out there, and there are good fighters out there, but they're dodging her, and that's a bind she's in.
It's fascinating to see that she has been primed for this, big role. And in many ways, she's the anti-McGregor because, she's so softly spoken. She
comes across really well in the film. It's very interesting.
But she's very softly spoken, and she's not a natural salesperson. And yet, here she is being thrust into the limelight with Billy Joe Saunders gone. The issue that she has in women's boxing isn't just women's boxing. We see it with a lot of women's sports at the elite level in terms of a lack of depth, because they are newer sports and because they are still building. We see it with rugby, we see it with Gaelic football, ladies football, we see it with camogie as well. There is a lack of depth in a lot of these sports, and it is an issue that will continue to be there until there is a greater number of kids who do it. So it's not a unique situation.
Yeah, and it's actually a wider problem with boxing as well. Like James Tennyson is from Belfast. He's fighting for a world title next week. And how many people knew that? How many people have ever heard of James Tennyson? He's fighting, and there was a time of an Irish fighter fighting for a world title be the talk of the country for weeks beforehand.
Yeah. I didn't actually realise that. So Hearn is obviously with Taylor, and he's really trying to go big in the States now. He's, as Philip writes, or Mark Gallagher. Mm-hmm. He's got Bob Arum and Al Heyman in his crosshairs, and he's trying to flex his muscle in the States. So he's talking about becoming the top promoter in America within 6 years, and he has the backing of a $1 billion 8-year deal with DAZN.
Yeah.
Have you heard of DAZN?
No. I have, yeah, but just from being around the Katie camp.
Okay. So
they're very excited about this. She's very much part of this project.
Yeah. So DAZN is hoping to become basically the Spotify of sport, or the Netflix of sport, whereby they'll hoover up everything, and as part of that, they're going to have 16 cards annually. Matchroom will, and Katie's a big part of that.
There's it's video streaming service of boxing, basically. Yeah.
So is it just boxing they're focused on as opposed to sport?
I think so. At the moment it's boxing.
Okay. It's going to be interesting when someone tries to do the sports version of that whole Spotify thing.
If it brings everything under one roof, I think a lot of people will be very happy with that.
But isn't it? We're at a bad point now, actually, for the customer, where it's so fractured and you have to pay everybody. Yeah. It's hard to escape the frustration last night that the Arla match in Dublin is on Sky Sports, and Virgin Media have all these other games, and Sky have nabbed this Ireland game, which frankly they don't care about, let's be honest. Scott Pinto and the lads aren't really digging too deep into things. I know they've Keith and Phil Babb there and everything.
I'm curious, I wonder did RT even bid for that, though?
I don't know.
I'd be curious about that. RT showed a documentary about turtles instead. a few people who were at the Viva might have preferred to watch.
What was more exciting? Because I saw a few tweets about the turtles being better. Right, okay. Yeah, but that is a nuisance for the viewer. It is. How are we at this point? I don't
subscribe to everything because I only subscribe to Sky Sports. I have Virgin Media because I'm on Virgin
But then you miss all the Champions Cup rugby. You missed Leinster. You missed Munster.
There are ways and means.
Okay. Okay, fair enough. But it is.
But anyway, I don't subscribe to everything. Well, you can't.
A Spotify thing would be just dandy if we could pay our few quid a month and get that. That's us pretty much done. Is there anything else anyone wants to give a brief mention?
Another
to?
Mark Gallagher piece on Pat Burke.
Oh, yeah,
It was very, very good. The first Irish-born NBA player. Really good, and just going through a career that spanned stints in Russia, Turkey, Spain, America, played for Ireland. And interestingly, at the end of the piece, Pat is talking with Mark about the talent coming through in Ireland. He mentions a kind of seminal game just before the senior basketball teams were disbanded, where was it Denmark they were playing, Kieran? It was just somewhere around here.
Yeah, I think
they were
so.
one game away from the elite level of European national basketball, and they didn't make it. And then he says, look, everything fell off a cliff with the financial problems that the Basketball Association had. But he's back now, and he's been at camps in Gormanston, and he's just been so taken aback at the discipline of the kids, the team ethic of the kids, which he says you just don't see in America, and very impressed with the skill levels as well. So
yeah, that was the most interesting part, I thought, because he's done about players were very encouraging of each other. There's no yelling or criticising, which you see a lot in America, because kids are being driven by their parents, who are obsessed with them being the new Steph Curry and making them rich, basically. But here he finds a more encouraging approach from parents and the kids. So some people would have argued with that. I know people say on sidelines here in soccer, etc., they can be a bit brutal, but it's interesting that he took that take.
Yeah.
So.
As ever, a UFC chat generates lots of discussion. Gents, I think the point about boxing, MMA, martial arts, etc., an activity sport where the objective is to hurt your opponent is wrong. Rugby, GAA, etc., the objective is to put the ball down over the try line. Yes, there's an overly physical element to certain team ball sports, but regulation can deal with this. Not the case when your objective is to hurt your opponent, says Ocean in Greystones. Brian in Dublin, no ship has sailed. That's a weak, lazy argument. Well,
in relation to
what was that relation to?
UFC and the fact that it's
legitimised.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Brian, in fairness, no ship has sailed. That's a weak, lazy argument. There was about a 15-20 minute discussion. You can take one line out of it if you want. Good for you. Goes on to say, why not just give them weapons and let them at it? Well, obviously no one's going to do that. If your argument is everyone has a deep down fascination with violence, that's not an argument, that's a fact. Then we should allow it. Pure rubbish, he says. MMA is not a sport, it's violence. You can hold someone down and repeatedly beat them around the head until they're unconscious. Disgusting activity. In other actual sports, the goal is not to hurt the opposition. Again, Brian, you've said absolutely nothing that wasn't said several times over. Our point is, if you completely get rid of it, well, one, that's a difficult thing to do, and two, where does it go? It goes somewhere.
Yeah.
Like, we can be sort of mature about this whole thing. I understand people who look at this and think it's horrific. I think you both think it's fair. Neither of you like it.
Not a fan.
I don't
particularly
particularly
fan, but like it's. I know a lot of people are, but I've been in boxing matches and you're sprayed with blood. You know, if you're ringside, blood is spraying in it. There's a vapor spray of blood all through it. So.
Gents, thanks so much. Very enjoyable chat about various things.
Joe.
Brendan O'Brien from the Irish Examiner and Kieran Cunningham from the Irish Daily Star. We'll take a short break.
Off the ball on News Talk. News Talk brought home gold at the 2018 IMRO Radio Awards, winning in 6 categories. Best Specialist Speech Programme, Future Proof, Best Sports Broadcaster, Joe Malloy, Best Speech Broadcaster, Sean Moncrief, Best Newcomer, Tommy Walsh, Best Innovation, Future Proof, and Best Current Affairs Programme, The Pat Kenny Show. This is IMRO award-winning radio. This is News Talk.
Recycle for free with We Ireland. Remember, smallthingsmatter.ie.
You can join any type of company these days, but wouldn't you rather shape one? Aldi are now recruiting ambitious graduates to join their Graduate Area Manager training programme. They're looking for graduates who combine intellect and fresh ideas with a determined roll-your-sleeves-up attitude. You'll have the chance to run a multi-million euro business after only 12 months. And you'll be presented with new challenges and new opportunities every day. Apply now at aldirecruitment.ie. Closing date for applications is November 30th, 2018. Aldi. Every day amazing.
Hello, I'm Liz O'Donnell, Chairperson of the Road Safety Authority. Do you know someone who's led the way and helped make the road safer for your community, school or workplace? The Road Safety Authority's Leading Lights and Road Safety Awards is our chance to thank these people and give them the recognition they deserve. The closing date is the 26th of October. Let's honour their contribution. Visit rsa.ie to make your nomination.
Come in, HQ. This is Field Agent Martin.
Go ahead, Agent Martin.
The humans have shown clever thinking by going directly to Energia, getting themselves 29% off electricity, 28% off gas, and €50 cashback. It's Ireland's cheapest dual fuel bundle.
That's a lot of numbers for their little brains.
They're calling 1850 300 700 or searching cheapest to get it.
Remarkable. The clever humans save and save again with Energia. Hit it. Switch to energia.ie.
Based on average annual usage, discounted unit rate, standing charge, PSO levy and carbon tax. Prices September 24th, 2018 and subject to change. T's and C's and early termination fee apply. Estimated annual bill €1,534. Verification energia.ie/EAB.
It's true. Prevention is better than cure. That's why at over 60 Life pharmacies nationwide, we offer a range of health services to help you maintain good health. We can check your blood pressure, your BMI, your blood glucose level, and a whole lot more. While at many of our Life pharmacies, you can also get your winter flu vaccine. Visit lifepharmacy.ie to see the full range of health services available at your local Life pharmacy. Life Pharmacy. Live better together.
Better luck next time, Brian. Funny old game, golf. Now, you got off to a cracking start, by the way.
Here's the question. Did Brian really lose? You see, last week he switched his car insurance to AIG Golfer and got a really great deal.
Pity, because you're putting.
AIG sponsor the GUI and ILGU and have great prices and discounts for
The
golfers.
hazard on the 9th is usually my
So,
water
maybe
due.
some extra bunker lessons from the pro with those savings, Brian. Thanks, AIG.
For quote, visit aig.ie/golf. Terms and conditions apply. AIG Europe Limited is authorised by the Prudential Regulation Authority of the United Kingdom and is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland for conduct of business rules.
Off the ball. This is News Talk.
So we're back. We'll podcast the paper review as ever in the usual places. Owen Sheehan's back in studio. Plenty in the papers today.
Yeah, plenty in the papers today. Plenty of reaction to that chat from earlier on as well. Of course, the UFC chat always kind of sparks a...
It's incredibly divisive and polarising. There's not much of a middle ground there. People tend to hate it or love it.
Yeah, it's true, isn't it? I think perhaps the two lads in studio, particularly Brendan, is one of the people who's actually on that fence, who can sort of admire why people like it without actually having that personal affinity to the sport, which is, I think, a rare stance. I think you're either hardline for it or hardline against it.
And what are you?
To be honest with you, I'm not against the idea of it, and the whole, like, I'd be on your side of things saying the ship has sailed, it's far too big. It's a behemoth now, the UFC, and with that, the sport of mixed martial arts is also a behemoth, beyond the point of legalising it, particularly in this country. I think you look at, say we had Chris Fields in the week before the McGregor fight, and he kind of talks about some of the great work he does with just kids who are looking in and getting into mixed martial arts for the right reasons. These aren't kids who come into the gym to be Conor McGregor. He says that when people come in with the strut or with that sort of way of speaking or whatever it may be, he knows straight away that they're not going to make it, that their whole aim is to make really good martial artists, to make them, to help bring them to the top of the game, whatever it may be, via jiu-jitsu, via grappling, to a certain extent via boxing. And it's creating those top-level athletes, which is what SBG seem to do, particularly under Chris Fields out in Swords. And like, that's one of the great stories of Irish sport. Like the Conor McGregor thing, personally, do I think that's a great Irish story? Well, I think there's elements of it that you can admire, and there's elements of it you can take away, but I wouldn't necessarily hold it up as great as some people might view it to be. But I think the whole idea of this being a new outlet for people, for them to, you know, have a sport, for them to find some sort of discipline, if that's the way you want to look at it, I think it's all well and good on that regard. But then you get into the scenes we saw in Vegas last week.
Yeah.
And I think at this point, it's fair to say that the UFC is worse than MMA. Now, a couple of years ago, we were having the opposite decision, or the opposite discussion, where it was like, what do we do with MMA in this country? Like, not everybody's going to make it to the shining lights of the UFC. Not everybody's going to be a Conor McGregor, the good news story.
Yeah.
Whereas now I kind of look at it and it's like, is Conor McGregor the good news story of mixed martial arts? He's a good news story for himself, for fame and fortune and all that sort of stuff. But I'd have my doubts. I think the grassroots mixed martial arts, there's a poetry in it.
Yeah.
Like a lot of pugilistic sports. So the very long answer to your question
I think
is...
the long, nuanced answer is generally the best.
It's kind of where I stand in it, because, like, you know yourself, it's probably the thing we've thought about a lot and spoke about the most down through the years, down through the last 5 years or so. So, yeah, like there's obviously a lot of reaction as well to the earlier discussion about Ireland. I just found this an interesting text that came in from Tommy in Cork, who said he was working in a bar yesterday, and he said, after our customers involved in every play in the